Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode Around the Fire on Spirit Reflections. My name is Fred Gouveia. If you're here for the first time, Spirit Reflections is an ongoing series of conversations in English and Portuguese about people's personal and spiritual journeys, the tools they found along the way, and how those tools shaped who they are and the work that they do today. We interview artists, philosophers, scientists, and religious people of all backgrounds, and in the process discover more about ourselves. So, if you're here for the first time, please like and subscribe to our channel, follow us on Spotify, and give us your review there. It's very important for the algorithm to spread this message to more people. And drop your comments below, suggest topics and guests you'd like us to interview. And today we're going to be talking with Shavasti, who I have already spoken with on this channel. So if you'd like to see the first interview that we had together, where Shavasti goes deep into his personal and spiritual journey, look at the description of the video below and you'll see the link. And today we're going to be talking about shamanic constellations, how the two worlds come together. And for that, without further ado, let's bring Shavasti. Hey, Shavasti.
Hi, Frederico. Nice to see you again. Good to be back.
Thank you for being here. So, this is a very provocative topic, shamanic constellations, and it speaks very close to my heart. And when you mentioned that you had just come back from a workshop this weekend where you held a shamanic constellations, I said, well, why not talk about that on our
Mhm,
channel instead?
mhm,
So,
mhm. Yeah.
why don't we start from the beginning, how you first came across shamanism and then how it wove itself into constellation work
Mhm.
for you?
I first read books about shamanism back in the 1990s, which is when I started studying family constellations as well. And so I was introduced to both worlds pretty much at the same time. However, when I lived and worked in South Africa, and there I gave many family constellation workshops, almost every week, actually. Just about every weekend I was giving a workshop in South Africa. I made friends with a traditional healer, which is called Sangoma. That's what traditional healers are called in many parts of South Africa, Sangomas. And her lineage was Zulu in terms of her healership, although she herself was not a Zulu. I believe that she was part Sotho, part Swana. Um, and if she's listening, she might correct me if I've got that wrong.
Mhm.
But she was an indigenous African woman. And so we became friends. And so I would invite her to do healing ceremonies in my workshop space where I gave family constellation workshops. And so, and so the healing tools are a little bit different in Africa. There's a natural homemade beer that's involved and different herbs that are burnt. So a lot of people know shamanism because of the influence of the United States, and so a lot of people associate shamanism with Native American spirituality.
Right.
But the reality is that I understand that the word shamanism itself comes from Siberia. It's a Siberian word. And so it was the initial spiritual practice and healing practice of all cultures throughout the world. And
Of
so
native
shamanism,
peoples all over the world, right?
yeah, native peoples. And so there are threads that are very common in all forms of shamanism all over the planet. There are belief systems that are common, not identical, but are fairly similar. And there are some unique aspects depending on the culture. So my first kind of more in-depth look into the world of alternative healing in terms of energies and calling upon the ancestors and spirits and spirit guides and shamanic guides was in Africa through my friend who was a Sangoma. And what really grabbed my attention is that after we had known each other for a while, I opened up a new workshop space, and I wanted there to be a very special ceremony in order to open up the space for ancestral work with my family constellation work. So she invited her teacher to initiate me in the world of working with the ancestors and to do a blessing of the workshop space that I had. And so this man, who was a Zulu, And he was a very dark-skinned man, and the context of me mentioning that is that when he started to dance, he started to embody different ancestors and bring them through. And then all of a sudden, I'm staring at the face of my grandfather.
Oh, wow.
And my father, of course, was not a dark-skinned Zulu man. But I recognized his face. And it kind of shocked me. It frightened me a little as well. But I'm very curious. And I thought, okay, well, what's actually happening here? So that really, really grabbed my attention. I didn't dive deeper into the world at that time of shamanism because I was very busy with my family constellation work.
Just one thing, Shavasti, I wanted to go back to that moment that you shared when you recognized your grandfather's spirit entity energy through that Zulu man when he was dancing. Did you afterwards speak to him about that channeling or that presence you felt of your grandfather through him?
I didn't speak to him because he didn't actually speak English.
Oh, okay.
So I had no personal conversation with him. But I recall having a conversation with my friend Larato, um, and she assured me that it was something that happened from time to time, that some of the um, I guess priest is I'm not sure what the proper word is for the teachers of the Sangoma tradition. I'm not too sure what they're called. This is many, many years ago. So I'm talking about 2005 that this happened. So so nearly 20 years ago now.
And we're recording this in 2023, so yes.
Yes, and we're recording this in 2023. So, but I understand that that was part of the tradition, was to bring through the ancestors, and so this transfiguration took place, which again enthralled me, intrigued me, frightened me a little bit as well, to be 100% honest, because I'm thinking, well, how is this actually happening? So it wasn't at that time that I really dived deeper into the world of shamanism. But I maintained my interest, and I continued to read books, and I attended a couple of shamanic workshops, including a workshop of Shamanic Constellations by a Dutch gentleman called Dan van Kampenhout, who's actually written books on shamanism, Shamanic Constellations as well. So I attended one of his workshops too, in order to find out more. And then years later, starting in 2009. And so between 2009 and 2013, I studied with a Native American shaman. And so I joined one of her programs. Her name is Patricia White Buffalo. You can find her on the internet
Yeah,
quite
these are
easily.
all great resources that we're going to be putting at the description of the video for people to do further reading.
Yeah,
Patricia White Buffalo.
so Patricia White Buffalo, who has a 3-year program in shamanic practice. And so I delved deeper into the world with her. But it's taken me quite some time to find a place of merging between my 25 years experience with family constellation work, and then also my experience with shamanic and energy healing work. The two dovetail very, very well. You see, there are some people in the family constellation world that see family constellations as more or less a psychotherapeutic process.
Hmm.
However, there's a lot more to it than that, because we engage in the knowing field, and so therefore it's also an energetic process as well, because there are phenomena that take place within family constellations that are not seen in regular therapy outside of the workshop space.
And Shavasti, if we can just for a second define a little bit for people who have never heard this before, we engage in the knowing field.
Right. Well, so then we're talking about energy. Mhm. So, for example, I'll give you an example from the 1990s. Myself, I think it was my second or third workshop that I attended. It could have been my first workshop, but it's an experience that stayed with me. And so, in a constellation, we take individuals to represent either living individuals or individuals that are no longer with us. And so, in a way that is still a little bit mysterious, because the more we explain it, the more complex and the more
Right.
unbelievable it sounds. And so there is a little bit of mystery. There's a way in which the representatives have access to the feelings and thoughts of the people that they're representing. Mm. And sometimes even display the physical symptoms that they might have been suffering. And so there was a particular constellation in which I was brought in to represent someone's grandfather, which I thought was quite straightforward. And there was nothing to do. You just stand there and you wait for whatever arises within you. So what happened with me is that I stood in as the grandfather, and then I stood on one leg. What was odd about it, every time I put my leg down, it spontaneously went back up again. And I really had this resistance to standing on both legs. And because I've been in the spiritual and energy healing world for many, many years, it's not a phenomenon that frightened me, it just intrigued me. And I thought, okay, we'll just go with this. Then the client said to the facilitator, my grandfather lost his leg in the First World War.
Mm.
And so that got my attention, and that made me very quiet within, because I was not aware that I was consciously channeling, and I wasn't using my psychic abilities or powers. I just stood there and I felt it in my body, and there was this physical impulse to raise one leg. And so there I was, representing the grandfather who had lost his leg. Could have been the Second World War. I actually, at the moment,
Sure.
I'm 100%
Yeah, but that's a great example of
Yeah.
being in touch with the knowing field.
With the knowing field. And so in the knowing field, we're opening up to representations and the presence of those who are no longer physically with us. So in other words, with the dead. Mm-hmm. So in the shamanic world, we also engage with the ancestors. We also engage with spirit guides, and we engage with shamanic guides. So again, another non-physical world. And so for me, over the years, there's been this emergence of a perfect fusion between the two different worlds. And so let's not pretend that family constellation work does not engage in the non-physical world.
Right.
Mm-hmm. There are phenomena that appear that are clearly from the non-physical world, as was my own particular experience.
And in my own experience, by studying Spiritism in depth for 20 years, Allan Kardec, its founder, his first book published in Paris in 1857 called The Spirits Book, which has over 1,000 questions and answers that he compiled and asked through mediums all over Europe and North America, through correspondence, in letters, as well as in personal seances with people who would channel and would go into an altered state of consciousness and give answers, including two teenage girls who would be completely unconscious mediums. They would go into trance, and where would they come back, they would not remember a thing. So the information contained in this book, called the Spirits Book, comes from these sources of different mediums. And Kardec only included the information that was uniform in its essential answers. Everything that was not uniform in the multiple sources, he discarded. And in one of those questions, he asks, do the spirits influence us? And the answer was, more than you can imagine. Many times it is them who are sort of conducting your lives. And when we really think it's you. I'm paraphrasing, but that's the gist of it.
So for me personally, and I do not speak for everybody that does shamanic constellations, I'm not the ultimate authority in this field, or any kind of authority in this field, only in as much as I have studied shamanism in depth, and I have 25 years experience with family constellations. And so I've derived my own way of working with the two modalities as a fusion simultaneously. So for me, shamanic constellations are more ceremonial in nature than regular constellations. So regular constellations can be quite dry. They can be very therapeutic in nature, in a traditional therapeutic way. But shamanic constellations are a lot more ceremonial. So for example, I've just given a shamanic constellations workshop the weekend before last in Bulgaria. It was a 4-day workshop, and we combined regular systemic constellations and also shamanic constellations, not at the same time, but
Sure.
I worked differently according to the client and what their presenting issue was. And so we started with a lot of ceremony. And so we built an altar where we placed photographs of the dead, candles and offerings, fruits and local herbs, etc. It also happened to be the Day of the Dead
How beautiful.
in
In
Bulgaria.
fact, we did talk about this over messaging, our messages, that we wanted to do an episode on the Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead, since it has so much resonance with the work of family
Right,
constellations,
right.
honoring the dead and the ancestors. So,
Well, the 4th of November, which is different to the rest of Europe, the 4th of November is the Day of the Dead in Bulgaria.
oh, okay.
And so the first day of my workshop was the 4th of November.
Beautiful.
And as it was a shamanic workshop, we couldn't let this just be forgotten and unacknowledged. So we built an altar to acknowledge the ancestors, um, which is deep in shamanic tradition, which is deep in traditional spirituality across millennia, across every culture, to honor the ancestors, those who pass on life to us, who pass on wisdom
Right.
to us, who pass on knowledge and experience to us. Mhm. I still cook some of my mother's recipes, who no doubt learned from her mother, and my grandmother learned from her mother, etc., 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 etc. So I have some traditional Spanish recipes that I still cook that I'm very grateful for because they've been passed down through many, many generations.
I'm
So we
starting to get
started by,
hungry.
yeah. So we built this altar, and then meditations in order to enter the shamanic world through the doorway of the heart. It's
Oh, beautiful.
important to enter through the doorway of the heart because all healing is about the movement of love. It's about restoring love. It's about restoring, as Bert Hellinger in Family Constellations would talk about, restoring the orders of love. Mm-hmm. And so meditations in order to not only enter into the shamanic world through the heart, but also to summon the shamanic guides and healers, and also to ask for our healing and beneficially influential ancestors to come and make themselves available to the process. And some of that we do through dance, and across many cultures across the world, dancing and dancing for and with the ancestors and with the healers is one way to summon forth those energies. So on a shamanic workshop with me, there is a lot of dancing and with drumming,
Beautiful.
etc. And so that and it also serves the purpose of taking the participants into a light trance state from which we can enter that world. And so once we open that world and invite these energies and the spiritual influences and spirit guides into that space, that's when we start our constellations. And so one of the constellations we do is just simply a soul retrieval. Mm-hmm.
Soul retrieval.
Soul retrieval.
Let's talk about that.
So that is retrieving a part of us that we have either neglected, denied, distance ourselves from, or have lost through trauma.
Mm.
And so many of us grow up in a culture where there are parts of us that become denied. Mm-hmm. There are parts of us that are not welcome. So that could be, for example, our gentleness. So, for
Mm.
example, when I was growing up, I was often told to toughen up, toughen up,
Right.
toughen up, toughen up. And so I learned to lock away my gentleness. I learned to lock away various feminine aspects of myself, that they weren't to be seen, they weren't welcome because I was too soft and I was too kind, etc. And so we all have parts of ourselves that we learn to lock away. So, for example, many young girls were taught to be kind. They were taught to be pretty.
Right.
And therefore their intelligence, particularly if they were smarter and more intelligent than the boys around them, was not particularly welcome. Hmm.
So
And
soul retrieval can be a type of deconstruction of gender roles that were externally imposed upon us as we grew up.
correct, 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 correct. Um, I think the word soul retrieval is misunderstood. I have a much broader interpretation of that word. So I just see it as being a part of ourselves that has either been neglected, denied, locked away, shunned, or separated because of a great trauma.
Got
Mhm.
it. So up until this point, we're talking about our own souls. There's no connection with entities.
No, 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 no. Just a
Got it.
part of ourselves, a part of ourselves. And so that gets represented in a constellation. So we have somebody who is representing the lost part of ourselves. We have someone who is representing beneficial shamanic influence, so someone who represents a shamanic guide, and then someone for ourselves, if not ourselves directly. I tend to work, I tend to work with my clients directly rather than through a representative. That's
As
just my
in placing the client in the field as
yeah.
themselves.
Yes, I place the client in the field as themselves. 9 times out of 10. 9 times out of 10. I prefer to work that way. Um, and so with drumming and with movement, there is a process that takes place in which the client makes a movement towards the separated or lost part of themselves. And it can be a very intense process. And having just witnessed this again this past weekend in Bulgaria, um, a constellation can take half an hour.
Right.
There can be a lot of tears. There can be the body can tremble, and so it's also an energetic process as well.
And Shavasti, in these situations, does the client name what the lost part of themselves is, or does it stay unnamed and the representative for that unnamed part just
Mhm.
moves with the field?
It remains unnamed, but it becomes very clear to the client. Very clear to the
Got it.
client. Yes, yeah, very
Got it.
clear to the client. Um, so it can be a deep, anxious part of themselves, or it could be to do with um, a promise they made themselves or a vow that they made to be silent about something.
Mm,
So these are sort of aspects of things that came up this past weekend, um, and so I mean, I would not have a problem with the client naming the lost part of
sure.
themselves, but just in how I normally work, it's not normally named, it's just represented, and then it just comes to light on its own, and it
Right.
becomes very clear what it represents for the client.
And that becomes more impactful for the client and all the participants, anyways, when it stays unnamed and the field manifests it, and people, through that phenomenon, realize what it's about and go from, and you guide them from there, right?
Mm,
Facilitate from there on.
mm.
And do you then study the ancient traditions of a particular location, like Bulgaria, for example, and then you start the rituals or the ceremonial aspects of the shamanic constellations with those references from that
No, not
region?
particularly, not particularly. Although I did ask my clients in Bulgaria to bring indigenous herbs rather than imported herbs, because then we're
Right,
working with the spirits of the land and the
of
mountains
the
and the
land,
river
yeah,
in Bulgaria, and also with Bulgarian ancestors as opposed to Native
right.
American spirits, etc. So yeah, so that's really the only instruction that I give.
Beautiful. And so once that part of the soul retrieval is concluded, do you could then continue a regular family constellations workshop, and then at some point you include the shamanic aspect if you feel like it needs to be there? As I understood, that's how you did the 4 day workshop, right? Depending on the client's situation or issue.
I'm not really going back and forth. Um, I didn't do any traditional family constellations at all in this past weekend. I did other types of constellations that are less systemic in nature, so deeper healing movements. Um, so Yeah, it's kind of, it's a different energy if you set up a regular family constellation, then move on to a shamanic constellation, then go back to a regular constellation. And so I wanted the whole workshop to be more ceremonial in nature. Yeah,
Got it.
yeah.
And were the people there first time participants, the majority of them, or had
Oh
they
no,
attended your
um,
workshops before?
I think almost all of them. I had a group of 35 people, so at least 30 plus were trainees in a family constellations training program.
Got it. So they were familiar already with this
Yeah, they were
method.
familiar with family constellations, and they just wanted to experience and work with a different way of working, and very enthusiastic. And I'm going back next year
Beautiful.
to do the same thing.
You
Yes.
weave a thread of community that you are able to develop each time you return. That's beautiful.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I've been to Bulgaria, I think maybe 7 times now already to give
Nice.
workshops. Yeah, yeah.
Nice. And so, is this approach one that you would normally do it for people who have some familiarity with family constellations, the shamanic aspects of it? In other words, would you advise somebody to introduce this modality to people who have never done a workshop before, have never attended one as
Mhm.
participants?
I've only ever worked shamanically with people who have done family constellations before. However, I don't see any particular issue or problem with working in this way with people who have not done family constellations
Great.
before. I don't see an issue with that at all. Yeah.
Beautiful.
I mean, as long as they're in it, open to energy work and open to the mystery of some healing movements, because there's always some kind of phenomenon that takes place that is unknown or could be unknown that suddenly makes manifest in the workshop that gets people attention. Um,
Right.
so
Yeah, and to your point, I think the biggest hurdle is getting people to open up in a group setting about personal issues.
yes, yeah. So it would be very difficult to work in that way with people from the street who've never done therapy before,
Right.
or who've never entered any kind of personal process, who have never done any kind of healing or self-reflection. So I really move in that world, really move in that world. I mean, I do occasionally get somebody who comes in completely fresh to this world to one of my workshops, and I kind of take them under my wing, and I'm not trying to convince them of anything, and
Sure.
they can participate as much as they want or as little as they want, and they normally go away touched by something. You know, over the years, people often ask me, "Well, how do family constellations work?" And the reality is, we could spend hours talking about that. And the shortest answer that I give is, I don't really know, but I just know that
Right.
it does.
And
I
that was
don't.
one of the most powerful experiences in our week-long immersion in Bali, where you and four other teachers,
Mm,
world-renowned facilitators, gave us several practical exercises and moments of reflection. And in one of those that you led was the I just don't know
mm,
sort
yeah.
of mantra and affirmation, and just sit with that for several minutes and
Hmm.
really feel that in your body. And it was quite powerful to
Well,
have
that's my own personal mantra, because I do a lot of work, and in the old days, like 20 years ago, I used to prepare for everything. I would prepare and make notes and prepare for workshops, and it preparation just interrupts the flow. When I sit with I just don't know, and when I get my body accustomed to that statement, I just don't know, then I relax.
yeah,
And when I relax, and I'm open to something new appearing. So I really don't prepare for my workshops. During every break, I go and sit somewhere and I wait. And I wait for an image. I wait for an inner movement to come that shows me what the next step is. And that is how I work, moment by moment by moment by moment. Mhm. So, for example, for this interview today, I thought we were talking about something else. And then, then you told me what the topic was. And I thought, oh, well, I haven't sat with this. So, what did I ask you? Can I just go away for a minute? So, I literally went and sat on my bed for 1 minute, just to align myself to this topic, not to figure out what am I going to talk about, but just, okay, so the topic is shamanic constellations. And so I just sit with that and I wait for a feeling or an image to come. I don't sit in my head trying to figure out, well, say this and say that, say the next thing. I just become an open channel.
Right. Yeah, we established the intention here that it was going to be shamanic constellations. Right away, it sets up a field, and all you had to do was just sync up with that field by sitting for
Exactly.
a minute.
Exactly. Yeah. So you set the intention. I was intent on something else until you informed me
We'll
otherwise.
do that one too. Stay
Yeah, we'll
tuned,
do that one
everybody.
too. So I just need to I just needed to realign myself. So that is really how I run all of my workshops and really everything that I do. I walk into the unknown all the time because family constellations, we are walking into the unknown all the time. Every time we set up a constellation, we have no idea what direction it's going to go. And
And
so,
and in your experience of 20 plus years of family constellations work, have you tried to set an intention for a particular workshop, a practical one, say couples or honoring the dead or the inner child, and you found that in the weekend workshop something totally different played out than what you had originally
no,
intended?
I've never had preset intentions.
Got it. That's what I wanted
Never
to
had preset
check with you.
intentions. Never, 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 never. I've never worked that way. Um, I just allow whatever wants to emerge, and it's not chaotic. When I say allow whatever wants to emerge, it doesn't mean that it's a chaotic workshop with
Right.
no direction. Um, and so there's flow, but there's also simplicity with it as well. Things do not need to be complicated in order to create a healing solution. They can be quite straightforward, really quite straightforward. And so for me, the shamanic constellations this past weekend were very, very powerful. They created a lot of healing for people. People went into very, very deep processes. And I'm looking forward to giving my next shamanic constellations workshop, which will be in March in Istanbul,
Oh,
March
beautiful.
2024 in Istanbul. Yeah.
March 20th through the 24th in Istanbul,
No,
and
March 2024.
oh, March 2024 next year.
Yeah.
And that one is open only to Turkish speaking clients, or if you speak English, you can sit in that one too.
I think it would be a complication to have English speakers attend that workshop because there is translation. And then if there are any group exercises, and there will be some group exercises, then we have to then find
Go back
another
and
English
forth.
speaker,
Yeah.
go back and forth and find another English speaker. So it really is actually only open to Turkish speakers.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. And in this world of shamanic constellations, Shavasti, especially in this weekend workshop that lasted 4 days, do you notice that people come back the next day and say, I had this dream, it was very powerful, and can we work on this dream today in order
Uh,
to piece things together?
no, that hasn't happened. That hasn't
Okay.
happened. Yeah. Yeah. So we do a lot of dancing. There's a lot of dancing, which is something that I learned from my own shamanic teacher, Patricia White Buffalo. We would dance for hours on end with the drums. And it's a very effective healing tool as well. And so we would go into the dance with an intention. And the intention would be to discover that which is not serving us, to burn off that which is not serving us, to become conscious of that which is not serving us, and also to dance with our shamanic guide. So
In an alchemy of release, if you will,
with an
or
alchemy of release
transformation.
through the dance. Yes. Yeah. So yeah, my students had very, and they loved the dancing part of it. So, but it's not like a boogie in a nightclub. This is very shamanic, rhythmic music that's being played with lots of drumming, etc. And so all over the world, we see indigenous peoples dancing to drum music.
Right.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
so
it
it's
harkens in a very basic and ancient type of musical discourse, which is rhythmic in nature.
right.
And rhythmic is physical. That's how we interpret rhythms through our physical
Yeah.
body. And so there's not a lot of instructions necessarily that need to be given in an intellectual level. You feel it and you set the intention, like you said. And
Yeah.
after a few hours, people don't really have to report back. They just
Mm.
went through the process and they're ready
So
for the
through
next layer.
and so through the dance and the movement and the meditation, we're continually opening the doorway to the shamanic world, continually opening the doorway to the shamanic world. So we would dance and then do a constellation, dance and do a constellation, dance and do a constellation, meditate and do a constellation. So we're constantly invoking the presence of the shamanic guides and the ancestors to hold us, to guide us, to heal us.
Sounds
And
like
then
you need to bring your fitness watch because you'd be burning a lot of calories in those 4 days too, right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, some
Nice.
of the dances were pretty long. Yeah, some of the
Beautiful.
dances were pretty long.
Beautiful. And if and I guess if people want to discover more about your work, they can always read your books, which we also have here in the description below.
Hmm.
In the Patricia White Buffalo Shamanic Practice Workshop that you did, I wonder if there's some insights that you could share with us here in the context of what you're doing today with family constellations for people to get a clearer sense of how the two can work together.
Hmm. What do you mean? I didn't quite understand the question.
You said you went to the Patricia White Buffalo Shamanic Practice Workshop, right?
Well, it was a training, not a
A
workshop.
training,
It was a
pardon me.
three-year training. Yeah, it was a
3 year training, right?
three-year training.
So if there's things that come to your mind from that 3 year training that you could share here in the context of family constellations work that could be useful for people that are in this journey of integrating different modalities with their family constellations
Right.
practice.
Well, first of all, as empowered individuals, there's nothing to be afraid of with the spirit world. Through family constellations, we're already engaging with the spirit world. That's very, very clear. Hmm. And that the spirit world can be our allies. It doesn't mean to say that lower energies don't exist, because they certainly
Sure.
do. So the lost and forgotten parts of humanity, the results of trauma, etc. So these are all part of the spirit world as well. And so through collective intention to bring about healing and to summon forth energies that can support us. And so the doorway is the heart. The doorway is the heart. The doorway is the heart. And I continually repeat that. And so I learned a lot from Patricia. And for me personally, it's the development of the heart that is of ultimate importance. If we're involved in spiritual work, then we need to ask ourselves, well, why are we here? What are we doing? And it really is all about restoring humanity's heart and restoring broken hearts. It's about encountering broken hearts and bringing healing to broken hearts, and not only for ourselves personally, but also to our family system and across generations, so that future generations could have fewer wars, for example. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Fewer children who are abandoned and abused and mistreated. And so it's all about healing the heart. And so when we enter the shamanic world or enter the spirit world through the doorway of the heart, then we're summoning forth benevolence. And it's working directly with that benevolence that is very important. Working directly with that benevolence.
So, would you say that a parallel way of looking at this, at the lower energies in the spirit world, are what we consider shadow work when we want to look at our shadows and work with our shadows and become familiar with our shadows and embrace it and, integrate it, accept it? Would that have some kind of resonance, perhaps with lower entities and lower spirits in the spirit realm?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm not an expert in that particular area, and it's not something that I talk about with an amount of authority. However, my experience is that a lot of lower energies are simply disowned parts of humanity. So parts of ourselves that have been um, separated through trauma, through
Like
hatred,
excluded somehow?
excluded through acts of violence, etc. And so we all have, I'm very hesitant to use these words, we all have these lower parts of ourselves. parts of ourselves that we've excluded. So doing a shamanic constellation in the form of a soul retrieval constellation, we certainly can come across a lower part of ourselves. But define low, because in my experience, when we see these parts of ourselves, they are frightened. So when you approach a frightened cat, what does it do? It hisses and it scratches and it attacks. So we could think that we are approaching a very aggressive cat, but in fact it's a very frightened cat. And why is it frightened? Because every time it goes out, it gets attacked by dogs, let's say.
Sure.
And so here we have a traumatized cat. And so externally, it can appear to be aggressive and unfriendly and vicious cat. But when we get closer, when we appease it, when we approach it with kindness, if we're successful at that, what we see is a cat that's very frightened. And so in these separated parts of ourselves, that is often what we come across.
So are there manifestations of tremendous rage and anger and painful sobbing in those moments?
Painful sobbing, yes. Anger, yes. So I've seen it all. But none of that particularly bothers me. I remain calm and centered with it. I think that when we come across something that is dark or something that is disturbing, it's of paramount importance that the facilitator remains calm and centered, not detached and dissociated, because sometimes detached and dissociated can look like calm and centered as well, depending on how skilled the individual is at masking what's really going on with them, but really calm and centered. And so I know to the depth of my being that love and kindness is the solution to everything. Love and kindness is the solution to everything. So no matter how lost somebody is, no matter how dark something is, when approached with love and kindness and acceptance. So if we approach it with you're bad and you're evil and you need to be retrieved, you need to be saved, then that's not helping matters.
No. Right. In your experience, have you worked with individuals who went into those moments of tremendous anger, rage, grief, and because it was a shamanic context, they also tapped into their psychic and mediumistic abilities and therefore went into a trance state that was difficult to get them out of?
No, I've never experienced that. I mean, I've had experience of people going into those very deep, rageful, fearful spaces. Of course, that also happens in regular family constellations as well at times. But no, somebody going into a deep trance state that they can't get out of. No, I've never experienced that.
Beautiful.
Never experienced that. Yeah.
Beautiful. Nice. I think this is a great introduction to shamanic constellations that we can have on Spirit Reflections for people to discuss, comment, and ask us questions, everybody, of what we talked about here. And we'd be happy to answer them in a future episode. This is hopefully developing a long thread of conversations around the fire for people to benefit from. So,
I think it's a very beautiful way to work. I love working with shamanic constellations. The shamanic world and the astral world is very much my home. It has been my home for a very long time in terms of my work. When I went to the Barbara Brennan School of Healing, which is an energy healing school, the astral was very much my playground. And so I love the work in that area of the human energy field. So the Brennan Healing Science refers to that as being the fourth level. And so that's very, 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 very much my home. And so over the years, I've integrated a lot of what I've learned from the Barbara Brennan School, from Patricia White Buffalo, from Family Constellations together. And so when I work with people one-on-one, I can be doing cord healing, working with relational cords, etc. Although that's not my particular focus. The language of the soul is more my focus. But yes, I look forward to doing more shamanic constellations. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you did mention something I have never heard before, so I must ask. Relational chords.
Yeah. Well, in the human energy field, we have chakras.
Okay.
And so the most accepted model is that we have 7 main chakras. There are lots of
Right.
minor chakras as well. And there are some traditions that give us 8 chakras, and there are some traditions that give us 6 chakras. But the main accepted model is 7 chakras. I mean, to be honest, when we enter the world of the non-physical, it's very difficult to put a very firm and fixed external structure onto it.
Right.
And so therefore the model of 7 chakras is a very useful model to use. I'm not saying that it's the ultimate truth, but I'm saying it's a very useful model. So each of the 7 chakras, we have energetic relationships with other people. We are energy beings.
Right.
And so because we're working together, we would have connected with each other energetically, so sent cords to one another. If you're a dear friend of mine, or if you're my lover or my partner, then there will be many cords between us as well. Hopefully,
From several chakras.
from several chakras, yes. So hopefully connecting heart to heart.
Right.
And so, yeah. But a lot of people also have relational cords coming from their solar plexus as well, which can be negative cord attachments in terms of control and will. It's
Resentments and unfinished business,
yeah,
grudges, that kind of
yes,
thing.
etc., etc. Yeah, yeah.
Got it. And what we could call entangled cords, entanglements.
Entanglements as well. So a lot of the languaging we use in family constellation work is mirrored in energy
Right.
healing work. I've never
They're one and the same. Yeah.
I've never particularly seen the separation between the two. Yes.
Yeah. What Telia de Chardin says, which I love, everything that rises converges.
Right.
So the vocabulary in family constellations, shamanic world, when it rises in intention, in the heart-centered kindness, it all converges,
Right.
and it's all the same ultimately.
So for me, I want to continue offering more shamanic constellation workshops. Not only because they're personally very pleasing for me, but I see the power of the transformation that takes place, and because it really does get people out of the mental. It really helps people get out of the mental and just really come into the heart and to follow the natural movement. Follow the natural movement.
And it's definitely not this or that. It's both. Because you can have a setting where there's a lot of intellectual learning and studying and reading and discussing and analyzing and conceptualizing, which is all very useful and beneficial. And at the same time, you can have a setting in the same place where people loosen up and go into their bodies and out of their heads more, to echo what you just said, and experience and feel it in their bodies, something more akin to shamanic dancing and ceremonial dancing, in order to connect with the rhythms, the ancient rhythms that are vibrating all over our body unconsciously, right?
Yeah. So it really is a doorway into the world of, I call it the beneficence, of the beneficence. Yeah. So that which is kindness, which is love, that which is beneficial. You know, for generations, we were taught that God was a he.
Right.
And that God was separate and superior to us. The other thing that we were taught is that nothing else in nature had a soul. human beings had a soul, and that we
Mm.
were separate and superior to animals and nature as well. And therein lies the root cause of many of our problems. So there we have a God that is separate and superior to us, and nature that is separate and inferior to us.
These deeply ingrained dogmas and
Mhm.
stories that we were conditioned to believe in, right?
Yeah. So through shamanism and through shamanic constellations, we are attempting to bridge that gap, because there is a vast field of awareness and consciousness that we are a part of, and we invite that in and we participate in that and we become a part of that. We also invite in the spirit of the rivers and the mountains and the trees, and we bring herbs in, and so we invite in the soul of nature as well.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah, and what is beautiful to see is the media really approaching that world and making it intelligible and teaching it, if you will, to children. Disney, for example, so many movies like Coco and Soul and others that are attempting to showcase this whole dimension of the ancient native spirituality,
right.
and for people to connect with that is already in them, right?
And so that was our initial movement, is to heal the separation that has been caused between divinity, our divinity, and also the divinity that exists in nature.
Right.
One of the constellations that we did was that we did a group constellation to represent all of those who had been falsely accused of witchcraft by the church in the past. It was a very powerful constellation that brought up a lot for people, because there was some anxiety in the room as we began to enter this world. And I began to address that. There were a lot of questions about evil spirits and things like that.
Right.
So we
Right.
have been taught for generations, that this world is all about the devil, that it's
Right.
all evil, it's all the work of the devil, and it's not. It is our original spirituality. And so what the churches have done is to work hard to own all of God's authority. They made God a man, they made God an individual entity, as opposed to God being all that is within a united field of awareness and consciousness. And so my shamanic workshops are in part about healing that separation that's taken place and addressing that fear. Really, really addressing
Yes,
that fear.
there is a lot of beauty, wisdom, depth, and healing contained in the Judeo-Christian tradition from thousands of years. And at the same time, when we see the way that the Ten Commandments was transmitted to us, it was all based on don't do this,
Mm,
don't do that,
mm,
don't stay away from this, avoid that, all sort of in a warning
mm,
tone. And I think there's a level of that still permeates our collective unconscious
mm.
in walking in fear of these places.
Well,
Oh
I
my
think
God,
it
this
was
is the devil, this is the hell, this is,
I think it was more concrete than the Ten Commandments. It was the fact that millions of people were burnt at the stake.
right. In ritual sacrifices, you mean? Or in witchcraft?
No, I'm talking about the witch trials. And
Right, the witch
so,
trials in the
yeah,
Middle
so for
Ages.
hundreds of years in Europe,
Right,
especially women were accused falsely of witchcraft and were
right,
burnt to the stake. And so there's a very deeply ingrained fear of persecution and prosecution,
right,
and death and torture for entering into this world. So it became forbidden. It
right.
became absolutely forbidden. Now, I don't want to go into too much detail now because it would take up too much time. But in 2013, I had a near death experience. And from that time forward, I started referring to God as the benevolence, because that's all I experienced
Beautiful.
was
It's
this
just a feeling, right?
vast benevolence, vast benevolence. And yet we've been taught to be afraid of the spirit world. We've been taught to be afraid of God. I'm a good God-fearing Christian.
Right.
I'm a good God-fearing man. I'm a good God-fearing woman. So we've been taught to fear this world a lot. And so in part, my Shamanic Constellations workshop is around healing that fear, and opening the door to the shamanic world and to the spirit world and saying, welcome, come and have a look.
I
Come and have
guess
a look.
in a way is deconstructing our fear of the patriarchy and moving towards a love of the paternal, and then including the maternal and putting them on
Yes,
equal footing inside of us and around
yes,
us, right?
yeah, yeah. So, yeah.
We can go on and on, but you have a pig that's roasting and I don't want it to burn. So
Yes, indeed. I do have a pig that's roasting. Sorry to any vegetarians listening at the moment. Yes.
no, but Shavasti, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. And I hope that if you're watching, please give us your feedback, your comments, any questions you have. We'll make our best efforts to answer them in future episodes. And until then, I wish you all the best and see you in the next episode Around the Fire.
Thank you very much, Fred. Ciao. Bye.
Thank you.